Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host this week being Mike Service, and our guest is Gretchen Kittelberger. Now, many of you may know Gretchen from her athletic achievements, being a CrossFit Games competitor as well as a high-level gymnast back in the day. But now she's on to a new endeavor that's really interesting for the community. She is the founder and president of the IF3, the International Functional Fitness Federation. This is actually something that was her brainchild and is really, really interesting. Their mission is to provide international leadership, structure, and resources to fuel the growth of functional fitness as a sport, as well as enrich the experience and safety of its worldwide participants. Now, essentially what they're trying to do is get functional fitness to be recognized as an Olympic sport. So being someone who comes from the Olympic movement, having competed in that realm for many years, I find this whole situation interesting in terms of trying to get a new sport from scratch into the Olympics, what goes into it, some of the challenges that Gretchen has faced over the last few years, how much it's grown, how many federations they now have around the world. I think there's over 50 countries now participating, and some of the things that they're trying to do, some of their short and long-term goals. They have a goal of trying to get into the 2028 Olympic Games in LA, which is really not that long away. And we talk a little bit about some of the challenges around doping, around judging, around movement standards. And to me, this is just a really interesting episode. We hope you guys enjoy this one. Hope you guys pursue some more information around the IF3, because it is something that I think will help enrich the experience of all athletes out there looking to compete in different ways. Enjoy. Well, Gretchen, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. Now, we've known you for a while now. You've been out to our Power Monkey camp. I don't even know how long ago. Do you remember what camp you were at?
This was a single digit one, I'm sure.
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it had to have been, I don't know, like back in 2016, 2015, 2016, like a long time ago. Yeah.
That sounds about right. Well, some of our community from Power Monkey Camp probably remembers you, obviously also from your incredible athletic achievements within the CrossFit space. But now you have a new endeavor. I mean, I don't know if most people know that, you're a lawyer as well. You've done a lot of things on the legal side within the sport, both for HQ and outside. But now you have this new endeavor that is fascinating. It's awesome. I'm sure it comes with a lot of trials and tribulations and challenges. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what it's all about, the IF3, the International Functional Fitness Federation. Before we get into some of the nuanced components of it, can you just give us a general rundown of what the IF3 is?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So IF3 is, like you said, the International Functional Fitness Federation. And we're the international governing body for functional fitness as a competitive sport. So what we are trying to do is, besides offer things like governance, anti-doping, and all those resources to the athletes and offer them opportunities, we're also trying to get the sport recognized by the International Olympic Committee. So bringing legitimacy and recognition to the sport that way, and with the ultimate goal being to get the sport on the Olympic program, hopefully sooner rather than later, but it is a long process to get a new sport in.
Okay, so there's a lot to break down there. Obviously, yes. This is a really big endeavor, and I want to kind of touch on a few things that you mentioned there. One, just in terms of getting a more standardized approach to competitive setting. From your perspective, what's been missing up to this point with competitions that are in the functional fitness space as to creating a standardized environment? What are you trying to tackle that hasn't been done already?
Yeah. So I think the biggest one for us is movement standards, right? And maybe the easiest one for everyone to kind of get on board with. Because right now, when you go to any competition in the functional fitness space, whether it's CrossFit sanctioned or it's not, there's not movement standards that everybody knows, right? You find out maybe the week before the competition, right, what the workouts are. And then at that time, you probably find out some of the movement standards, maybe not till the athlete briefing. What we need to do, if we want to have recognition as a sport and want to be seen as a legitimate sport to the global sporting community, the athletes have to know what's expected of them when they compete. They need to know the rules. So what we have done, and kind of maybe our big first project was creating a book of movement standards. And it's got every single movement that we can think of in there, and then exactly how it will be judged for that season, right? So you've got air squat, you have to show this starting position, you have to show, crease the hip below the knee, all of that. You have to show this ending position. And we have that for every single movement. So the athletes know, okay, I can practice my handstand push-ups to this specific standard all year long. And whenever I go to an IF3 competition, that's how it will be judged. If a movement's not in there, and we tried not to miss anything, but the first go around, the first iteration that we had in like 2017, yeah, we forgot some things, but that movement is not eligible for competition that season. And we've had it come up a couple times where our program committee is like, oh, we want to put this in. And we're like, oh, wait, that's not in the book. You can't do it this year. But we have a system where, okay, the next season it can be added. We review it every year. We tweak things so there's a way to expand the sport and add movements. But what we have now is consistency and standards. And this allows the athletes to know how to train. The coaches know how to coach them, right, to the correct standard. And the judges, or we call them our technical officials, it allows them to practice to the right standard. So we think that in and of itself is probably the biggest thing in terms of consistency. The other thing we've done is we needed a way to really explain what the sport is, right? When we're talking to these people from the Global Association of Sports Federations, from the IOC, and say, what is our sport? Like, how do you play it? And you can't walk into those conversations and say, it's anything and everything. We don't know how many events they're going to do. They won't understand, first of all, and then they're going to be like, this isn't right for us, right? So what we have done for our competitions is we say, look, when you go to an IF3 competition, you've got 6 tests, right? 6 workouts, if you want to say it that way, but tests, we call them. And they're going to be in these broad categories. Every single time, you're going to have 1 test of endurance, 1 strength, 1 we call body weight, 1 skill, 1 we call mixed, which that's where you really see like a long chipper usually, or, something that's really, more like that. And then the last one is power. So short and fast, like sub 2 minutes. So you can think of these almost as biases, right? You don't know what's going to be in that endurance test, but I'm going to be tested on endurance. Maybe I'm running, maybe I'm swimming, maybe I'm doing double unders with ski erg. I don't know. Like strength, you don't know what that's going to be. Like probably a heavy barbell, could be a heavy dumbbell, maybe a heavy kettlebell, but it's going to be heavy. And probably in, a repetition max, maybe a ladder, something like that. So you have at least an idea, a framework of what the competition is going to look like in terms of number of events, the abilities that will be tested. But doing it that way has allowed us to keep a little bit of what the community kind of loves in that unknown sense. Because the workouts are known in a way, because okay, there's a limit on the number of movements. It's got to be in the book. And I know I'm getting these categories, but unknown still, because the workouts themselves, the tests themselves, change every competition. So that's kind of the way we've started in terms of balancing what the community still kind of likes in terms of having some unknown aspects, and then what we need to have in terms of structure for governance.
Yeah, again, like that's branched off into some more questions that I have. Just on the movement standard side, because this to me is probably a big question for the entire community, because the standard is something I bring up in my seminars all the time, that standards constantly change. And, we teach towards the idea of building towards what people will eventually see in terms of highest level version of particular movements. Is the goal here to not only create a standardized approach to what the movement standards are, but also to say that there's going to be very little variation within that over the course of a long period of time? You mentioned changing things year to year. If something comes up, something needs to be tweaked, a new movement needs to be added. But is the intention to say that like the standard that we have for handstand push-ups now is going to be the standard for handstand push-ups for the next decade, 20 years, and we're not going to be changing that at all, even if someone's forearm length is such or that their heels aren't over a line? Is that the intention, to be able to say this is the standard we're going to be using for this movement forever unless something really unforeseen happens?
Yeah, that's definitely like the direction we're trying to go. Ultimately, we'd like to, right now we're doing annual updates because we're still so young, relatively speaking, compared to these, other established sports. I'd like us to get to the point where we can do it in 4-year cycles, like Olympic cycles, so that, we could go through that 4-year cycle and then, okay, for the next quad, we're tweaking these things that didn't go well in the quad before, but we're talking about little things. We're not talking about total overhauls. Maybe sometime, like if you look at like gymnastics, right, where they had the huge overhaul when we went away from the 10.0 system, maybe down the road in a couple decades, there's something like that where there's a total overhaul, but we'd like to have it majorly, for the most part, the majority of it being consistent, and then tiny tweaks. Hopefully we get to do that on a 4-year cycle. We'll probably be on a 1-year cycle for at least a little while longer though.
And this sounds very similar to actually what we do in the gymnastics world, right? And we change the rules according to every quadrennium. There are small tweaks along the way, year to year, new movements being added if someone does a new skill, or if the technical committee deems certain things to need to change for safety reasons or whatever. But we are working on our rules and regulations on a change every 4 years along with the Olympic cycle. Mike, are there changes in the weightlifting world?
I was just
like that.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I was kind of laughing. I'm like, oh man. I mean, weightlifting, you snatch and you clean and jerk. There hasn't been anything majorly changed since like the 70s when they took the press out of the sport. Things are more procedural. So in terms of making competitions move smooth and efficient. So little things like in the past, there was no problem. Let's say a weightlifter would go up and he would want to move the barbell on the competition platform. He could use his foot to do that. Well, now that's illegal. So you can't touch the barbell with your foot. And it's like a really strange rule, but there's reasons for it. But movement standard wise, that hasn't changed. I know a lot of weightlifters would love probably to have CrossFit rules or where you can have some soft elbows and press outs. But yeah, that's the very, very little has changed with that in terms of weightlifting. It's almost always procedural. And I was even curious about that with you guys, Gretchen, is procedures. Are you looking at ways to allow for like efficiency from one event to another, or not even safety wise, like not overloading athletes on one day of a competition to the next day of a competition, where it seems like sometimes that can be a free for all depending on who the organizer is like, let's see how much we can wreck them. So then they have to do a max lift on day 4 when everybody's, injury prone or something like that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're conscious of. And that kind of goes along with sort of like our 6 test kind of structure. And one of the reasons, right, we settled on that number because it's doable in a weekend. So I could do either 3 workout, 3 and 3 in terms of 3 tests, Saturday, 3 Sunday, or put it on, 2 a day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that kind of balances the volume for the athletes. It's still definitely always, on our programming committee and anyone who's really programming for any event to try to watch overall volume. And we have got together, a new committee this year, our competition committee, who's been tasked with creating more standards for competition procedures and efficiency. Like, what should your back room, your call room look like? How do you line up the athletes before, and then we march them out, and width of your lanes, how should that setup look for safety things? What's the minimum amount of thickness for the matting? If your rope is this foot, this many feet tall, you need to have, something that's more like one of those portable resi pits. And if it's only this tall, then we can get away with, a Dahlinger mat or whatever. So that's the kind of stuff we're working on now that's still sort of in progress, but that we've assigned to our competition committee to get done hopefully by the end of this year into early next year. So we have some of that more standardized.
Yeah, those are the unsexy things that people don't think about so much, but that, athletes, I know, appreciate that in the process. And then when athletes are feeling, safer and taken care of, it's a better spectator experience too, because you can see people focused on the event and not on all the random little things that maybe aren't happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And governance. Now, this is something that, plays a huge role in all Olympic sports. And the athletes play a very big role in that. Athletes have a say in, certain rules and regulations. I was on the selection committee for Olympic teams and things like that, where the athlete has a role within actually governance structure. I'm curious what kind of involvement you're getting, not only from the back scene from someone like yourself who has been an athlete, but current athletes. Do current athletes have a role in what you're building right now, and do they have a voice?
Yeah, so we actually have an athletes committee. And it's mostly, pretty much all people who have competed at our events. And we get together, I get together with them. We have standing meetings every like 6 months. We try not to overburden them because they're busy and they don't really want to be going to a meeting every single month.
Sure.
But we do, so we have the 2 standing ones that we do, at half-year intervals and say, okay, here's what we have going on. What are your concerns? What do you think of this direction? That kind of things, where we talk about big picture things, and then they're, obviously allowed to reach out and bring up issues at any time on the international side. And then nationally, a lot of countries, either because it's required by the laws of, sport in that country, or just because it's a good thing to do, have either athletes committees or athletes that are required to be on their board. So I know Sweden, for example, it's a requirement that you have an athlete representative on the board. So they always will have, an athlete there that helps to, make decisions for the organization. And then beyond stuff we do internally, we have a good relationship with the PFAA. We actually helped Brent get that started. He had reached out when they were first thinking about it. So we kind of helped them get it started, help them run their first meeting. And then I said, okay, we can't be the ones doing it. You need to be independent. And, we shouldn't be telling you your goals. You figure out your goals. And they've done a really good job of that. But we did kind of help and support them getting started.
Mm-hmm. This all sounds very similar to what goes on with existing Olympic sports. Have you had a lot of interaction or input from other existing sports or NGBs? Do you have contact with ones that have been successful? Just because you are an established Olympic sport doesn't mean that your governance structure is successful, and doesn't mean that you're internally being run correctly. I'm curious if you've worked with other NGBs and other sports that you found to be helpful and that you've got good guidance on in terms of building something basically from scratch.
Yeah. I'm constantly reaching out to other sports and other governing bodies to figure out how they're doing things. Ranging from sports that are very, very established and have been around for a long time to sports that are relatively new and up and coming, and some that are even, like us, still fighting for recognition because, everybody's journey and, people learn things along the way. So that's super helpful. I have a really good personal mentor who used to be involved with, he does something differently now, but was CEO of World Rugby for a while. And that's been invaluable to me just to know, because, he's seen it all as a major sport, a very large sport. Being able to know, okay, how did you guys do things at rugby? And rugby being a sport that was in the Olympics a long time ago, was not for a long time, and then got back in for Rio. Mm-hmm. So him having been through the process of, okay, this is how I take a sport and get it in the Olympic Games. So that's been, invaluable, being able to have him as like a personal mentor. And then, we do, just a lot of like even random sports that you probably haven't heard much about. But even the newer ones there's a jump rope federation that they're, a little bit ahead of us in terms of their recognition. We've become good friends with them. We've talked to the guys from tech ball, which is also a very new sport, who has very quickly gone through the governance process. So you kind of pick their brains and say, all right, how did you do this? Like, how did you get recognized so fast? And trying to learn from everybody. So yeah, we try to take as much as we can from people.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. And for listeners out there, one thing that's kind of interesting with the Olympic movement is that all sports need to be re-upped for an Olympic Games. You're not guaranteed to have your sport in the Olympic Games moving forward. There are tiers to how sports are kind of categorized. You have your top tier sports, the gymnastics, the swimming, the track and field, the ones that are kind of constantly mostly viewed. But then there's turnover, and there's new sports that are being added, and baseball and softball got left out, and wrestling was potentially being left out, and weightlifting is on the cusp. It's
always on the chopping block.
Right, for a variety of reasons, right? Doping and viewership and whatever else might be the consideration. But the IOC is making concerted effort to try to be on trend with what is interesting and what is up and coming. And 3-on-3 basketball in Tokyo, strange to me. Like, you already have basketball, why do you have a 3-on-3? sport climbing, new sport, karate came up, surfing came up, golf came up. We have breakdancing coming up in the 2024 Olympics in Paris in a couple of years. New trends are coming out, and it seems like this might be a really good time for something like the IF3 to capitalize on what has become a booming new, I mean, booming over the last decade plus, but it's starting to become much more well recognized, whether that be CrossFit or just training with high intensity in general. Does it seem like the time is right for you guys to really capitalize on this and recognize the IOC, hey, we're one of these emerging sports. It'll be interesting for you guys to have on the docket.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The timing is great. With, I guess Tokyo is really the first one where they start adding these new sports. And the way they've kind of done it is that that local organizing committee, for the host country gets a say in what sports are included for the new, 5 or so that they include every year, which is why you see things going in and out with those new sports. Karate being in Japan and baseball and softball, but then you don't see those two didn't get passed through into France because the organizers in France were maybe not as interested. So with the Olympics coming to LA in 2028, we were like, well, this is the perfect timing for us, right? We have a sport that was born in California, developed there, was literally in LA for really probably its big growth to popularity when the CrossFit Games, were in California, in LA for several years. And, we've got these new rules where the LA committee can add new sports. So for us, we're like, man, this is really great timing for what the Olympic movement is looking for and for us. That being said, obviously the process to get a new sport in is very, very long. And we are very, very short on the time we have to do it. LA is going to be making decisions soon about what kind of sports they want to consider for those new sports spots. If they choose to add new sports, they're not obligated to. So, have we done enough? Have we done enough in the governance space to be in that pool? Well, we'll find out soon, but obviously we would love to be.
Oh, that would be amazing. That would be so cool.
I just, from my sport bias as a weightlifter, I'm just imagining the tables turning, because weightlifters can be a little bit snobbish sometimes and always pull the Olympic sport card. And I always want weightlifting to be in the Olympics, but if there was a switch and functional fitness was in the Olympics and weightlifting would not, the amount of foot and mouth that would have to happen for the weightlifting community.
That's coming from a weightlifter right there.
I know.
Wow,
I mean, humility's, sometimes just has to be force fed. It would be funny. I hope that both sports can be there. I hope weightlifters and then, fitnessers alike can share the field in the US. That would be so cool. Like you said, Gretchen, to be in LA, where the sport was really born and blossomed, and it would have buzz, that's for sure. They would, people would come out in droves to see, which of their favorite athletes from so many different countries. It's such a global sport. So I can't imagine a better situation if it can happen.
Now, challenges. Obviously, there are crazy amount of challenges with getting something so large up and running. And you've been doing this for a number of years now and slowly chipping away. And it sounds like you're starting to work on some more of the detail components. You got kind of the bigger structures in place. But what have you noticed as being some of the biggest stumbling blocks in being able to actually turn some of these things into realities?
Yeah. The biggest challenge probably started in the very beginning was one, making people believe in the longer term vision, right? Because this wasn't an immediate thing. And a lot of times people are like, well, what's in it for me right now? You're like, well, right now, not as much, but, give us 5-10 years, and then you're going to start seeing these advantages. So that was hard in the beginning, but we really had, especially a very strong European group that they just get sport differently. They look at sport differently than we do here in the US. So when we said, oh, we're creating a federation in the system, they're like, yeah, that's just how sport works. So, that was really a big catalyst for us in the beginning to really have that support. So that was kind of a challenge, still is a challenge in some countries. Obviously, I guess we have to say that, with the way, if we want to call it old CrossFit was prior to, some of the changes, they weren't seen as very inclusive or welcoming to things that were potentially viewed as competitive. So, at the time when we did start IF3, it was 2017 when we went public with it. There was this hesitancy of people to get involved because there was this sense of, am I going to be blacklisted? Is CrossFit not going to like it? And whether or not, CrossFit did like it or ever said anything back then to people, there was still this sense and this nervousness about people to get involved and essentially, we be crossing CrossFit. And we've never seen it as competitive with CrossFit. It's not meant to be. We're not trying to be the CrossFit Games. There's a space for the CrossFit Games as they are in the community, and we wouldn't want to lose that. Over time, that challenge has again become less and less just due to things that happened right in the past couple of years. And it's great to be able to say we have a really good relationship with CrossFit now, and that I don't think there's as much hesitancy from people to get involved anymore. But that for a very long time, that was a very real challenge and hard to engage, not just athletes, but even volunteers and judges and, people being very concerned about what would happen if they got involved with us. So that's been a really positive change that has happened, and we're really glad that things have kind of changed in terms of that attitude and that we can have a really good relationship with CrossFit now, because it's better for everybody, right? If we can, everybody can get along, and if brand and sport and brand and federation can work together, it's so much better for everybody. So that was one. And then the other big thing that has come across more recently, and not so much when we were starting, but is the sports politics of the recognition process, which, in the beginning, people would say, oh, it's so hard to recognize this and that. And we're like, okay, okay, whatever. We're just going to, check our boxes and do whatever. And we tried to sort of fly under the radar, and you can do that up to a point. And then eventually, you're going to get kind of pulled into some of these politics that happen with these recognition processes. So that has been a challenge and is an ongoing challenge. And it's frustrating because there's not a ton we can do other than try to make ourselves stronger as an organization, try to connect with the right people. But that's still probably maybe our biggest challenge currently.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, on the CrossFit side of things, you mentioned having a good relationship with them now, and you not really seeing the CrossFit Games as a direct competitor. Why is that? What do you recognize as potentially being different between what the Games is doing versus what IF3 is doing, and how your 6-event competition format maybe establishes as something different?
Yeah, I think there's something kind of magic in what CrossFit has created with, the really unknown and unknowable. And, you go to the Games and, oh, look, we're flying in a plane out to Aromas, or we're, going to the ocean, and you don't know. And that's really, they've done a really good job creating kind of that mystique around it. And that's valuable, right? There are moments, I guess, there's a good analogy I'll make in a second, but like that, I think, brings value to the community, but we can't have that in recognized sport, right? So I couldn't go, let's say we get in the Olympic Games. I can't have the athletes show up and say, hey, we're going to go to the beach instead of this venue that the IOC has told us we're in. Like, that's not going to work, right? So it's something, but I think there's a place for both. And I guess my example or the analogy is I watched recently the Tony Hawk documentary that was on HBO when he did the first 900, I think it was. And he did it, but the time had expired, and he had gone over and over and over again, to get this trick. And I think they made a comment they talked about how his dad ran some competitions and was very, very strict, and oh, that never would have happened, if it was my dad had run the competition, because he would have cut me off. But it never would have happened in an Olympic setting. But the moment and watching it, oh, this is so cool, he did this trick, it took him 20 attempts and the time ran out, so it doesn't count for competition or whatever. But the moment for the community was so important. So I think there's something that's really important about what the CrossFit Games is that we don't want to lose. But there's also a really big value in having recognized sport. So these two things can exist side by side, but they don't necessarily always have to look like each other. Exactly like each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense, and I can see where the value is. Now, it also seems like there's potential for what you're doing to also contribute to making CrossFit better and making the competitions at the games or semis and things like that even a little bit better. And one of the areas where I wanted to get your thoughts on is with regards to judging standards, and not just movement standards, but being able to standardize the judging process. And this is something that is constantly coming up within competitions. We saw a lot of things happen within the qualifying process into the semis with judging standards being different with regards to video submissions and things like that. And there not being really a standardized body around judges, and it's more around volunteers and people that are doing it on a weekend rather than people who actually have to go through testing formally, where it's very comprehensive and everyone's on the same page with the standards. How are you viewing judging and trying to create a more fair assessment process when it comes to what the standards are that you've created?
Yeah, so judging is a huge one. In terms of what we're doing, we pretty soon are launching, I think it's pretty much done, so it's probably gonna happen in the next couple of weeks. We're gonna launch a pathway, like an educational pathway for judging, where we're kind of in this sort of halfway space right now. There's gonna be two ways to enter the pathway. But what ultimately we want it to look like is that you have to go through education on the national level, right? The same way you might become, like a USA gymnastics judge, and you're able to judge certain levels all the way up through like level 10, and then they have brevet, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to go through your education path that's on the national level. Once you hit your national level, highest education path, then you can try to be an international level TO. And we're going to have 3 different levels. The basic level, we're going to call it class 1. And that's just, I'm a TO, I'm a judge on the floor judging the athletes. We're going to have education around our class 2, which is going to be focused on team, so particularly synchro movements. How do you judge those synchronized movements, and youth athletes? So, maybe their movements are different, but sometimes you got to treat the kids a little different. Maybe we're, the way you kind of speak to them, and maybe we're less aggressive with the hand signals, and just whatever it ends up being, of how we work specifically, to make sure the youth athletes are treated appropriately. And then our class 3 is going to be the head judge, your head technical official. So how you act as a head judge on the floor to give briefings, how do you handle appeals, evaluating. There's going to be an evaluation component to give feedback to these guys. So how do you evaluate other judges, other officials on the floor? So that's going to be our education system. It's a lot to obviously integrate and get started, but so we're starting with obviously the class 1. They'll have to take a written exam, and then they'll have a practical evaluation. They have to show up at our worlds or our masters worlds, and one of our head staff will evaluate them before they can get that class 1 designation. But this stuff is important, right? Because look at any other recognized sport. Like, you can't just kind of volunteer and show up and be like, yeah, I'm judging the world championships today. Like, mm-hmm. There's training and education, and you have to go through, in a lot of sports, years and years to get to the level where you're considered, proficient enough to be judging elite athletes. Mm-hmm. And we have unique challenges in our sport because a couple of things. One, we just need so many. You need so many judges to run a competition. Right. Because let's say you have 10 lanes of competition. Okay, well then I need at least 10, because each athlete gets 1. And sometimes I need 2 in the lane, but they need to rest between heats. So now I need to double my number. And just the financial aspect of trying to pay that number of people is really tough. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I can think of a sport off the top of my head that has that high, that requires that many judges or officials or referees or anything in order to, just have the competition. So I think that's something that's a challenge, right? I think ultimately, if we can get to a place where you can compensate these people, that would be the ideal. We're not there yet as an organization. I think it's going to take a while to kind of figure that out. But I think the first step is they need to be trained, right? They just need to be educated and trained in practice. It's unfair to expect your judge to walk out there. They learned the standard in the briefing, or maybe the week before, right, when it was announced, and then expect them to be able to do it. like, even if you take a simple standard, seemingly simple standard like weightlifting, okay, they can't have soft elbows, they got to hit a lockout. If I'm not haven't had practice, like, yeah, I intellectually understand the standard, right? But if you put me into a meet right now, I'd be trying to cheat, looking at the judge next to me, making sure, like, all right, let me line up with what this guy says. So we really need to put them in a position where they have a chance to practice, because they know the movement standards in advance, so they can practice. And we give them educational opportunities to understand, what the movement standards are, how we expect them to even do little things in terms of, where do you stand when you judge an athlete? Okay, are we standing? Are we kneeling? What is the acceptable position? Like, everyone should look the same. I shouldn't have one judge on the lane who's, doing this, watching squats, one who's squatting down, and one who's standing up. Everyone needs to be as unified as possible. So there's a lot that's going to go into it. It's going to be a process. It's going to be, probably the thing people will complain about the most for years to come. It'll never be perfect, unless we somehow get to, electronic judging someday. But it's something that's really, really important for legitimacy of the sport. So we're spending a lot of time on it. And we'll hopefully have that pathway launched in the next couple of weeks, so people can start signing up to take their test and get their Class 1 credential.
Yeah, I love that there's so much emphasis being put on this particular space. And, coming from the gymnastics world, Gretchen, how challenging it is to judge gymnastics events, and how challenging it is to become a brevet judge, or to become someone who can judge at the highest level proficiently. And what we've noticed is, one, you mentioned paying judges, not just being a volunteer position. And I think initially it's just about trying to get enough people, like you said, not just interested in participating, but to travel to these events and to give up their weekends, or to give up full weeks at a time. How do you convince people to do that without having some form of compensation as part of collateral there? It's unrealistic to think that in the long run, people are just going to continuously volunteer and be at a standard that is, required to give the athletes a level playing field. And so it is something that is going to be constantly a challenge. It is in the gymnastics world, and we've been around for forever as far as sport has been around. And it's something that we deal with as well. One thing I'm curious if you've thought about it all, because it's noticed in the gymnastics world, country bias at all when it comes to judging. We see this a lot where, maybe it happens a little more subtly than just outwardly being obvious. But, a judge from a particular country wants their athletes to do well. And we see that less right now when it comes to CrossFit setting, but when it starts becoming nationalistic in terms of how people are competing, you're competing for your country at the Olympic Games or at the World Championships or whatever it might be. Do you envision, or have you guys considered at all the potential for judges to be voting for or pushing for like their athletes within their country a little bit more than they would just creating a level playing field? Because it's you hope that it doesn't become the case, but it is pretty natural to see that we have this issue in other sports.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we've thought about, and have, I think, kind of plans in the back of our mind of like, okay, when we're in a position where we can really enforce this rule, then we need to start. But things like, even if you look, so we move our world championships around every year. So if I'm hosting in Sweden, should my head judge be from Sweden? Right now, like, it's way easier for us to plan when the head judge is from Sweden and he can like handle other things or whatever. And should my lane judge, if my lane judge is from Sweden, should he be able to judge an athlete from Sweden? Should he have to move to a different, to a different lane? And ultimately, I think the answer to those questions is like, yeah, he shouldn't be allowed, right? If we're in a certain country, probably our head judge should be from a different country. And you shouldn't be allowed to be the judge in a lane for an athlete from your home country, or an athlete you have any sort of personal connection with. I think that's just the easiest way to do it across the board. Now, in terms of volunteer numbers, when we get still most of our judges from the local country that we're in, can we realistically do it right now? No. But I think that's the way it has to be. When we're at an Olympic Games, when you have the resources and the ability to pull judges from, hopefully by that time we'll have a ranking system and we'll know, all right, these are our top people and we can pull them from every country, then yes, it's easier to implement. But right now, even though we see and acknowledge that there's, potentially a problem, until we get the number of our certified judges up, and get those volunteer numbers up and hopefully make them not volunteers, it's something you just kind of try to work around as best you can, but we can't unilaterally enforce the rule because we just don't have enough outside, officials coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to hear that vision though, and realize that you're taking all of those things into account, because I think, so often people are very skeptical also of maybe the bureaucracy behind the scenes or anything like that. But I'm sure our listeners are interested in hearing these things, because they're either something that aren't in their mind, or there's something that they think is maybe considered irrelevant from the powers that be in sport, that they don't consider this. But it's important as something grows and becomes more legitimate to show this transparency too, which is really, really encouraging.
Yeah.
Now, I want to hear a little bit about just general structure. So for the listener out there, or for ourselves that are maybe a little bit less informed when it comes to how your years are planned out, what the qualification process is like, what your world championships, how do you structure your year, and how can people kind of understand, hey, how do I partake? If I'm a youth athlete, what does that look like versus a master's athlete? How do you structure your year, and how are the competitions formatted?
Yeah, so we've added a new competition this year, but our main ones, we have a world championship every year, a masters world championship, and a junior world championship. So right now, the world championship and junior worlds, we run them together in the same country, because our juniors we don't have that big enough numbers yet. We're going to break it out for 2023 is the plan. But so we have worlds and junior worlds, and then masters worlds in a separate country. We try to put the events kind of more towards the fall, end of summer, fall, to try to avoid, the major events in the CrossFit Games year. In terms of qualifying, it goes through your national federation, right? Just like it would for any other sport. So if you're, in Norway, you'll have to go through to Norway's national championship, and from the national championship, they take their top 3 finishers and they send them to Worlds. So what we allow right now, any country who has a national federation, you are allowed to send up to 3 men individual, 3 women, and 1 team of 4, 2 men and 2 women. And then for our junior age categories, this year we're doing 3. You can have up to 3 in our junior age categories and masters age categories. And juniors are 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And then this year we're adding a 19, 20, because we kind of realize there's a big gap, right? People, turn 18, they kind of leave juniors, but we're not really seeing people being able to be competitive on the senior level to like 22, 23. So we're adding in that 19, 20 age group to try to bridge that gap and give that age group some opportunities to compete. So every country right now, regardless of ability or strength in that country, gets those number of entries to Worlds. And then it's up to the country to conduct their national championship, conduct that whole qualifying process. So most of them do. Obviously, it's been a little hit or miss the last couple of years because of COVID. But what most of them do is, some sort of qualifier to a national championship. And then from the national championship, the top finishers will go to Worlds. And some countries, we're very much have a wide range of where our national federations are in terms of development. So if you look like somewhere like Germany, right, they have developed this really cool system where they have like state level championships that go into a regional championship that then goes into a national championship. You have other countries that are just doing, hey, anyone who wants to sign up, show up to nationals. Maybe, most are somewhere in the range of a qualifier that leads you to nationals. But it just depends. Everybody's kind of, at different stages of their development. And then, we have everything from countries where the sport is very, very popular to places, we have a federation in the Central African Republic, and they brought one guy to Worlds last year, and he, never seen a ski erg before. and like things like that. So we have a wide range. But that's generally how kind of the qualification process works. This year, we are actually adding one new event. We're adding a European championship. So that's going to be our first continental championship. In terms of our federation's development, Europe has the most well-established federation. So we felt we had enough to kind of branch out into the continental space with them. And we're actually testing a new format, which we think will actually has potential to be a future Olympic format. And it is a more condensed format. So it's still our 6 tests, but you go and do them within essentially a 2-hour time period. So you do, your endurance test, probably about a 10-minute break, which is just enough time for if you're broadcasting to have commercials, maybe some athlete interviews, some commentary. Then you come out to do your strength test, right? Couple-minute break, then you come out for the next one. So it's a little more, if you've ever seen, I guess and as an analogy, if you used to watch the old CrossFit Invitational where they did the teams and they did a bunch of workouts all together in a couple hours, it would look more like that in terms of being condensed. But we think this has a lot of potential for a potential Olympic format because it hits a lot of the checkpoints that the IOC would want to see. So we're testing that in July in Italy. Very small. We did it by invite only based on world finishes from last year with 10 men and 10 women. So they'll be testing out that format for the first time at our European Championships this summer.
Oh,
so that's in
Monopoly, I think. Is that right?
Yep, Monopoly. Yep.
Yeah. We're actually going to be in Italy in July. We're teaching out in Italy in July. So we got to see if we can sync up and make this happen. What's the weekend for it?
It's the 15th, 16th, 17th. So I'll be there the 11th through the 19th. So if
I think that's right after we leave, Mike. It's right after we finish up our little European tour.
I'll be at a wedding in Spain. I won't be far.
That sounds. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh yeah, no, Gretchen, I was just gonna ask with that. So with that format, you'll have the 10 men, the 10 women. So that'll be a one-day competition, and they'll run through all 6 events.
Yeah, so we're going to do it as they'll come Friday morning. They're going to run through all 6, the 10 men, then 10 women. And then we'll take the top 5. So that'll be like prelims. Top 5 are going to go on to Saturday. And then they'll do a new set of 6 tests as the finals to see who, gets the podium places. So that's kind of our long-term vision in terms of an Olympic format where you would do, early in the week, preliminaries, everybody runs the same 6 tests, and then you take your top people and you bring them to a final and run a new set of 6 tests.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of potential as a format. Yeah. Obviously, we need to do some testing, but the idea that you can sit down and watch it the way you would watch, a basketball game or a soccer game. And it's not like, okay, well, he goes, my favorite athlete goes at 8 a.m. and his next heat's not till noon. And I got to make sure you don't have to follow along all day long for an entire weekend. You can be like, all right, these are my 2 hours. I got to watch the match,
Yeah.
So I think that has a lot of potential from a spectator perspective. We just have to test it to make sure it works from a sport and a athlete safety and fairness perspective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm sure the IOC, those are things that you have to consider as well, right? Can we take a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday event and put it into a two-hour televised potential event that, a potential network will want to put on and is fun for people who are not in the stands to actually watch as well? Those are all things that are interesting considerations that you probably wouldn't have to think about unless you're actually running.
Gretchen, were any of the, like this formatting, did you get any inspiration from Grid League with any of this? Like how they tried to run a more fast-paced piece?
Not necessarily, I guess. So I didn't do Grid League for long. I went to like a combine and thought it was like super, super fun to do though, from an athlete perspective. But I do think the idea behind Grid, I don't think was bad. I think there was just some things that were, not done maybe correctly from like a financial management perspective. But it is, I guess, in a way similar to that sort of format in that it's more condensed and faster pace. I don't know if I would say I took inspiration directly from that, or at least not consciously, but everything you see around you, I guess, is inspiration in some way, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense to me because we've been going to the CrossFit Games and all the big competitions for a long time, and we love them. But a lot of times, feedback from athletes and spectators like, man, it's so long. It's like it's forever, and it's cool. But then again, it's like maybe a one-day event. Or I love the idea of just this prelim and then the finals, and it just makes sense. And it could, because I'm also from a sport that is done pretty quick and you're done, but that's also I think it's marketable that way for people to be able to watch and carve out time to even have more viewership.
So I think it'll be cool to see it work in action in Italy, and then obviously we'll have things to tweak and talk about with the national federations, and hopefully grow it from there.
Gretchen, how many countries right now are signed up as having federations?
Yeah, we've got over 50. I think we're on like 53. So it's good. It's growing. We obviously want more, but it takes time, right? It's not an easy job, but we're definitely getting there. And
I mean, from my experience as well, you mentioned this earlier, but Europe definitely has a more robust just sport structure in terms of youth sports and how they kind of structure participation in sports growing up. So I would imagine that, like you said, it's just a little bit easier for them to kind of implement something new like this. How has it been received in the US right now, and just the NGB here, and how is it structured? Who's heading up the USA NGB?
Yeah, it's definitely been, I think, a hard road for the US. For a lot of reasons. I think one, like you said, like the way we view sport in the US is different than, the way they view it in Europe. But our US Federation is run by a gentleman named Mo, is what we call him. His full name is Kason Morris, out of Ohio, who got involved several years ago. I don't think he intended to be the one in charge when he got involved, but it's kind of evolved that way. But I think their growth has just been a little slower for some reasons. I think the fact that CrossFit as an organization is, located in the US. So there's, much more deeper ties or emotional ties to CrossFit for a lot of the US athletes that a lot of the European athletes maybe didn't feel as strongly. So in the beginning, I think that was a struggle. But I think now, it's just the pandemic obviously slowed things down. The recognition process in the US is not as easy or favorable as in some other countries. It's actually really difficult, and because we don't have a Ministry of Sport the way, almost every other country in the world does. So the goal, for the athletes in the US, the goal seems a little more distant, right? Because it's like, okay, you have to get the US OPC recognition, but that's really not possible until you're really an Olympic sport. So it's not like a lot of these European countries where, they can get Ministry of Sport recognition and start seeing some of those benefits right away. Right. So it's been a little bit slower, to be honest, in the US, and that's not to say that Mo and his team aren't doing a good job. It's just a different, you have to find different ways to motivate the athletes to get involved in the US.
Have you had interest? I know Mike got a big smile on his face when he heard Ohio being a big factor here with the US NGB, but have you had communication with the USOPC, and has there been interest from their level on helping to facilitate anything? Or like you said, is it a chicken and egg situation where you won't get recognized until you participate in a big event? You can't get recognition until you do that. And it's a back and forth kind of struggle.
Yeah, it is kind of the back and forth struggle. And that is been the case for, US is not the only one that has that problem. There's that issue in a lot of the countries trying to get recognized where, even for us, a lot of the countries have a rule where, okay, well, your national federation can't get recognized until the international federation gets recognized. But me as international federation, I can't get recognized unless I have a certain number of already recognized national federations. So you get in this situation where you're like, I can't do anything. And this is something that the entry point to recognition, which is this organization called GEIS, which is also a very complicated thing, and things are very up in the air with them. But they recognized this and created a sort of beginner status, if you want to call it that, or like a first step called observer status that you could get in without having all those recognition points. So they are trying to address it because they do realize it's a problem and it's really bottlenecking a lot of federations. But it's, it is one of those things where you're like, wait, you're telling me I have to do this, but I can't do this because, so it's been very frustrating.
I can only imagine. And I mean, the fact that you're able to navigate some of these and be such a new sport and are on the cusp of doing some amazing things in terms of potential recognition with the Olympic Committee is just a testament to the amount of time and effort you've put in over the last 5 to 10 years. It's amazing to see. We're getting to the end, but I definitely want to jump onto one last topic that is probably more than just a couple minute answer, but I want to talk about doping a little bit because this obviously is a huge part of any sport, weightlifting being one that is normally in the news because of how prevalent it is within doping. And also in the CrossFit community, it's been something that's always been something that people are questioning as to whether or not there has been enough being done. Are we aligning, with USADA and with WADA and with the top tier doping agencies in the world to be able to make sure that we're using the same standards across the board? How do you view doping within the IF3? What are their goals within it? And who are you guys aligning yourselves with to make sure that, I'm assuming WADA and USADA, but how do you view the doping component of it?
Yeah, so anti-doping's huge, right? Hugely important. And that's always been important to us from the beginning. And we've wanted since the beginning to be a WADA signatory. So it's not as easy to align yourself with WADA. You can't just say, okay, we're going to align with WADA. We're in, let us in. It's changed a bit over the past couple of years. So it used to be you could not be a WADA signatory until you were recognized by GAIS, which I had mentioned, the Global Association of Sports Federations, which was another one of the problems because in order to be recognized by GAIS, you needed to be a member of WADA. So you couldn't do that. There actually ended up being someone did take that particular issue to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and said, hey, what the heck? Which resulted in WADA changing its rules in January 2021. So now we are allowed to apply to be a WADA signatory. You have to apply. You have to show that you are following WADA's rules. You have to do certain things like a risk analysis of your sport. You have to have a test distribution plan. You have to have actually done in and out of competition testing. And you have to pay them $20,000 in order for the honor of applying. So we, have done a lot of that background work, the risk analysis, the test distribution plan. We've done testing. We've used ITA, International Testing Agency for that. And they will do it for us in accordance with WADA's rules. So our big limiting factor right now is we're a small nonprofit, raising the money to be able to pay for the application fee. So that's kind of where we are in that journey in terms of getting the WADA signatory status. But people give CrossFit a hard time a lot about like, oh, they're not doing it through WADA. They're not doing it through WADA. But I don't think people understand that like, it's not just as easy as being like, yeah, we're going to be WADA signatories today. Like, let's go contact them and it's just going to happen. Like, even once we apply, we're probably looking at it, I'm guessing, at least a year to get through, their application process. It's not as simple as it seems. But all that being said, it's worth it, right? To do this and go through this process because our sport needs it. And we need to know, that we're having and maintaining a clean sport. So in the meantime, we do things like testing through ITA because, we do not need to be a WADA signatory to use them for testing services. And, they can do it in accordance with WADA standards. So that's what we did. We had testing for the first time at our World Championships last year, and it went very well. I think the athletes were actually excited about it. I know at least our world champion was very excited when he got drug tested because he kind of felt like, okay, finally, I can show like I'm a clean athlete. Right. I'm really glad I'm being tested, which is a good thing to see. But it's super important. Very expensive, but it's something we're working on, and it's definitely a priority for us and for all our national federations. And look, some of our national federations are actually doing more testing than we are. If you look at, so our Norwegian Federation has been recognized by their National Olympic Committee since 2019. And we're starting to see like there's a lot of benefits to that, right? They get funding from the government. So they're giving athletes stipends. They have a national team that they like take on training camps and like, and they're getting anti-doping from the Norwegian Anti-Doping Agency, who will show up, randomly at events or, even out of competition and test athletes. So the more we start to get our countries recognized, the more, anti-doping that will naturally flow in at the national level, in addition to stuff we do internationally.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the amount of things that need to go into this is just fascinating to me. And I'm so impressed with how far you guys have come with where you are right now. From your perspective, is 2028 realistic? What do you think?
Yes, realistic. Yes. Hard and, still would be a little bit amazing, right? If we pull it off. But it's not out of the question. There's there's technically kind of two ways to get in. We're hoping the new sport route is the way we can go. But if not, there's maybe the potential for like another option that we'll explore if that happens. But yeah, it could be doable. But either way, even if it doesn't happen, then we're on track to look at 32 in Australia.
I love it. I can't wait to see kind of next steps here. Mike, I'm gonna get to our last minute questions unless you got something on the agenda on your side.
No, I was, it goes back a little bit in the conversation, but just seeing recently quite a few of like your, I guess, highlighted athletes qualifying for the games, which was cool. So you said the world champion who's from Germany. He qualified. And then I saw one of the teams and individuals from Norway that qualified as well.
Yeah. That's like, so the Norway thing is so cool to me because it's finally like the proof of concept of how important recognized sport is. So Matilda, who just earned her spot individually, she's been with the Norwegian national team since 2018, right? She got some scholarship money from them in 2020. She's been part of this national team. They go to training camps like every month or two. So she said the benefit of, working with some of these coaches on a national team level and these other great athletes and training with them, money that's coming essentially from the government in a way, right? Because the government is funding the federation, this anti-doping, and you see how that has helped her. And I've gotten to see, because I get to see her every year at Worlds, right? See her develop as an athlete and reach her goals in the sport, whether that's in the IF3 system or, the CrossFit Games or whatever, but watch her progress and be like, hey, look, this works, right? We give these benefits to these athletes. We help train them. You give them money and support and watch them grow to the top of their sport, which is really very rewarding to see it working the way it's supposed to.
Oh yeah, and like you said, proof of concept. It's like you get one country to have the right steps in order to show some of the other ones, and I think with the European Championship model, more of those countries will be able to probably ask Norway some more questions and see if they can, get into that same process, and hopefully our American side can get creative and figure out a way to get involved too.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we appreciate you being with us today, Gretchen, and giving us some insight into all the amazing things you're doing to IF3. Before we get you out, we got some quick one-word answers. They end up being a little bit more than one-word answers, but if you're okay, they'll be nice and painless, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll try.
First one, what sport or discipline you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Oh, gymnastics.
Oh, see how easy that was?
We didn't have to ask it. It's.
Thank you very much for Chad and Mike have been on a little run lately, and they've been racking up some weightlifting points. So I appreciate you getting me back on the winning side of things.
Of course.
Any guests that you think we should have on the podcast that you've come across recently that we think might be good interviews for us?
Well, this is a self-motivated one, but who I was just talking about, Matilda, and kind of her journey with Norway. I think that would be should be a cool one to talk to about that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Absolutely. We could probably get her on the agenda as well. We'd love to have, anytime we get athletes on, it seems to be one of the higher ticket items with people listening in. So if we get somebody as interesting as that qualifying through the games from Norway. I'm actually really interested to hear how built out that is in Norway right now. Like all of the additional things that you get once you're recognized. That's really, really unique. So yeah, that would be a good one to have on board. Books and or TV shows that you've watched or read recently that you think are worth taking a look at?
I just read The 3-Minute Rule. It's about like doing presentations and presenting and how to like really distill your message. And I thought that was really, really good and interesting. So that's, I guess, would be the current book that I just read.
All right, fantastic. 3-minute rule. We got to put that on the agenda as well. Mike, anything you want to ask?
No, I probably need to read that book. I have trouble condensing things into 3 minutes. The podcast itself is already a good exercise for me to be more concise.
Well, before we close out here, Gretchen, where can people find you? Where can they find information on IF3? And is there anything you have in terms of parting words?
Yeah, so information about IF3, our website is functionalfitness.sport. And we're on Instagram as International Functional Fitness. And we have, a YouTube channel too, but it's, content more around event time that they can follow along. We're always looking for great people to get involved. So if you want to volunteer, if you want to, particularly if you're in a country where we don't have a national federation, we like to build our federations from the functional fitness, from the CrossFit community directly. We found the most success with that. So if you're in a country that doesn't have a federation, reach out and we can tell you how to get started. But we always are looking for more support and more people to get involved.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much, Gretchen, for the time, for the insight into what's going on. We'll be watching closely as we lead into the decision-making process for LA 2028, and hopefully you guys will be on the agenda for those amazing games coming up in just a few years. For everyone else, please be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durrani, and at Mike Service. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your hosts. I'm Dave Durrani with my co-host, Mike Service, coming in from Germany again. Mikey, thank you so much for tuning in so late at night. And until next time, everyone, thank you all for listening.